This is a video on how to answer a very specific type of multiple choice question. It is a multiple choice question for writing, and it is combine these two sentences. So this is my favorite. I really love to do this. If you think of this like a game, or you're going to accumulate as many points as you can and puzzle this out, then it becomes a lot of fun. Look at it like a problem of logic. So let's get right into it. Again, I just have to say we are not interested in finding the right answers when we are tackling a multiple choice test. It doesn't matter what kind of multiple choice test, but we want to focus on eliminating answer choices. Our job is to find the wrong choices. And for me as a test taker, that makes me feel a little bit less anxious because I can handle finding the wrong ones, right? It's finding the right one that can stress me out a little bit. I'm going to go into present mode for this, and the very first strategy I have when it comes to answering any type of multiple choice question on the AP Lang exam, but specifically for the writing multiple choice questions, and I cannot say this enough, you want to first scan the page. So pretend the passage was like this stuff up here. Your eye wants to go from everything above answer choice A, right? I see 1, 2, 3 lines. I'm not going to read those lines. Please do not read. Please just eyeball it. What do they look like on the page? So for me, I do see one italicized sentence. And so that's what your eye has to go to first. Do you see an italicized sentence? If you do, that tells you that that chunk of writing, that sentence, has been taken from the passage and then isolated and just reprinted as part of the question. And that tells you that they are going to ask you to consider maybe revising, maybe changing it, maybe adding to it in some way. If I see the underline part as part of the italicized, it is definitely asking me to compare the underlined part to the different answer choices below and to replace potentially that compare and replace the underlined part. So specifically, I'm concerned with something in that underlined portion. And then my brain needs to kind of like turn a switch saying, oh, the 5 answer choices below are going to give me different options for replacing the underlined part. Why am I even talking about this, right? You're like, I can read a question. And yes, we all can, but when we have very limited amount of time, and if I can save you 10 seconds here and 10 there and 20 there, then that is a good deal for you in taking this test. So you notice the italicized sentence, you notice the underlined sentence, that clicks in your brain and tells you you're going to have to be doing some comparing and some replacing. Then I want you to go up to the line before the italicized sentence, and we are going to, as soon as when we're at the line above the italicized sentence, we're going to read that, but I want you to read it for the first verb phrase. So what is that first action word? And when I see the first verb phrase, I see to combine, right? There is the wants, right? But what is that wanting to, what is the writer wanting to do? To combine. So I don't need to know necessarily that their sentence is 11 and 12. That's just going to clog my brain. So right now, how do you combine these sentences? Then I don't have to read this question, right? I assume that if the writer wants to combine the sentences, I am going to have to be asked to figure out what is the best way to combine them. So again, I'm trying to eliminate the little steps that it takes your brain to calculate so that you go in very clear and you know exactly where you have to look so that you're not spending your time navigating the actual question, which we can tell is 3 sentences, like 3 different chunks to it. All right, so we know that we have to combine these 2 sentences. Now, one might think, awesome, let me go back to sentences 11 and 12. I'm going to go back to my passage. I'm going to find the 11th and 12th sentence. No. We want to see and just test this with me. This is controversial, I know, because I'm telling you not to read, not to go back to the passage. Instead, I'm telling you to read how a sentence is written among the 5 answer choices you see. So in fact, I'm going to say don't read at all for meaning. Don't read at all for message or content or tone. All right? We are just concerned with how the words are organized in the sentence, what sort of punctuation holds these words together. That is it. So if I think to myself, okay, if I have to combine 2 sentences together, I want to make that the most efficient, like tightest sentence possible while still containing, making sense, correct? So if I am here, the first part to making our sentences tighter and together is to look at the punctuation. All right, if I see punctuation, and when I say punctuation, I mean commas primarily, dashes, parentheses, and I didn't include in this box, but I would also add now, semicolon, right? So any of those punctuation marks, anytime they're used like 2 together around the same time, especially if it's a parenthesis and a comma, it's going to be wrong, right? You either use the parenthesis or you use the comma. So the first thing is, do you have punctuation that's back to back when it doesn't need to be? Do you have a parenthesis where you might have some commas in between that parentheses, right? Because the whole idea of a parenthesis, it's giving you like a little sidebar. It's not supposed to be like this huge stretch of a sentence. Same thing with commas. It's fine to add in new information and sidebar it with like 2 commas, even 2 dashes. We do that all the time, right? But the minute that becomes extended and you are throwing in a whole stretch of writing, like many, many words with 2 commas and two dashes, that becomes too much for our brain as readers to work through. So eliminate the clunky choice. And I'm going to dare you, please try this at home. Do not read for meaning. Do not read for tone. Do not read for content. We are only going to read how it's organized on the page structurally. So here is sort of like our goal with this part right here. We want to begin after the very first punctuation mark. So if I look at A, B, C, D, and E, I'm seeing that they have this like leftover word from that original sentence, the part that's underlined, and I get all hung up. I'm like, wait, hi. No, just start with that very first comma. And so what do I notice? Well, my brain is mentally going to highlight any punctuation marks that I see, right? You're not going to have a lot of time, but I do want to train your brain when you're practicing, and this is super important, to mentally highlight, okay, I see dashes there, I see parentheses. I would say anytime you see an option, a choice with parentheses, probably not going to be the correct one when it comes to combining sentences. And I said that like a little secret because again, people might say, wait a minute, what are you saying? Don't say that. But I'm saying if you have limited amount of time, you need to have like these tools ready for you. So take a look at this. Let's just test what I've just said. I see parentheses, and then I see a comma, and then I see another comma, and then I see parentheses next to a comma. No. Not going to work. In fact, I just said you're never going to see that parentheses and a comma together. That's like washing your clothes and then like immediately washing your clothes. You don't need to do the same thing twice, right back to back. So based off of that, and again, this is pretty radical, but based off of that, I'm going to eliminate C. I'm just going to knock it out, right? Because my brain has to think quickly. It's all about eliminating. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is compare, okay, what's going on with punctuation in A and B and C and E. I'm going to start with my longest first. So I'm going to go to A. I do see 2 hyphens, right? Totally doable in a sentence. And I see that first comma. So I don't see anything like, I don't see 3 punctuation things going on. I don't see anything immediately back to back. However, That sidebar that is stuck between the two hyphens, again, shouldn't be a stretched out piece of writing, should be a phrase, right? Something to add more information to. So this becomes like a lot of information to read through. So I'm kind of going to put like a mental X through this. It's not my best choice, but let's just go through and see the next one. So I see the same beginning with this comma, and then I see this like huge stretch, and then another comma, and then this period. So I'm thinking, all right, that's a lot to get through before I get to this second comma. But again, I haven't looked back at it for the meaning, so I just don't think it's a great option, and I really want to cross it off. But just to be sure, I've already crossed off C. Let me consider D and E, right? I'm going to tell you right now, D and E are the shortest out of all of these sentences. And again, this might be cheating, but we're trying to get concise and tight, right? With our words, it's probably going to be the shorter of the sentence options. So right now, I'm going to look again and compare A and I'm going to compare B together. One trick, and again, if people are watching this and are mad at me for saying this on videotape, forgive me, but one trick is to look for this tricky little word being, and usually when being is used in writing, it is signifying or signaling a passive voice. And so it flips the actor, right? And so it flips the subject to the person who's passive, or the thing that is passive in the sentence. So let's just take this one. One good example of which is a defendant having his or her fate being deliberated by jurors. The risks of making biased decisions are too great. It sounds weird, and for that reason alone, I want to cross it out. But I'm giving you a reason to cross it out. When you see this ing being word, it is passive voice because the actors in our sentence, right, are the jurors. And the jurors are hidden. So it's actually the defendant having his or her fate being deliberated by jurors, right? That's actually twice removed. The jurors are deliberating the defendant's fate is the active, more direct, straightforward way to say it. So I do want you to memorize this, that being, that word, if you're between like 2 to 3 and you're not sure what you can cross out next, it does signal a passive voice, which is never proper grammar, right? It's never efficient and tight writing. So for that reason, and plus the reason that it's just clunky when I read it, too many words in between these periods or these commas here, I'm going to cross that out. So I've crossed out A because there's just way too many words in that hyphenated middle add-on part, and I've crossed out B because it sounds clunky, it has passive voice. I crossed out C because there's the parentheses. Oh, just that's the most obvious one, right? We don't even need to talk about that because everything is all together. If I'm taking this test and I think, no, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't have crossed out A, I'm going to go back to that. I'm going to read it again. That's when our brain is being wishy-washy, and that's when our brain begins to doubt those immediate decisions that we make. In a testing environment, research has shown that when we go back to second guess or to change our first choices, that's when we make the mistake. Go with your first choice, go with your instinct, be strong, leave it in the past, and move on. All right, so D, I see 2 commas, and then if I look at E, once we have 2 together, right, what you're going to do is you're going to compare D and E. They both are similar in the sense that the construction is the same, right? Like I'm not reading this yet for meaning or for any type of like content. I'm just looking at how they're arranged, and I see 2 commas, right? And then I kind of see the same ending of the sentence, right? The risks of making biased decisions are simply too great versus the risks of making biased decisions are too great. But then I see what's different here in between the hyphens versus in between the commas. And I'm going to take a look at that. Such as when jurors are deliberating a defendant's fate, the risks of making biased decisions are simply too great. Versus, like a defendant whose fate is being deliberated by jurors. Aha. What your ear should be picking up is that you have the being, which is a huge red flag, like you should hear it blaring at you, this alarm saying, don't cross me off, I'm not correct, I'm being. So being does need to be eliminated because it is signaling a passive voice, right? The jurors are deliberating the defendant's fate instead of the defendant whose fate is being deliberated by the jurors. It's just way too much. Like initially, when I looked at the endings, I thought, oh, E has a better, like tighter ending, right? It doesn't have that simply too great. But then I go back and I look at what comes in between the punctuation. And if I didn't catch the word being, I would have to really study it. But if I remember the strategy that my English teacher taught me with being, that tells me it's passive. So again, get it down to 2. Try to compare what's similar in construction, in the way that it's structured between the 2. And then you're thinking, okay, within that similarity, like they both kind of structurally do the same thing with punctuation. They both set it off with hyphens and commas. But then you notice that the words were too clunky. They just didn't make sense. So that is how I take a look at creating 2 sentences, combining them together. However, this is also a really phenomenal strategy for almost anything when it's asking you to revise a sentence. You can take a look at some of these skills that we did. It's the too clunky, it's punctuation that just is extra, like extra punctuation. It is the being that signals a passive voice. And then it's just too many words that are in between pieces of punctuation. So notice what's controversial about this is that I did not go back to the passage to read. Again, like don't share this with anyone, but I'm teaching you how to take a test that is timed. And so within this time testing environment, if you could answer it without going back, especially on these writing questions, you should do that. And you should use your time somewhere else, especially if I'm giving you the strategies to be able to dissect the answer choices isolated from the passage. This is a writing question, so it allows me to do that. Remember, you are not reading this for content. You are reading these answer choices to see how they are structurally put together with punctuation and the order of words. I hope this helps, and we will connect about this in class.